A start. Governance, we're ready to go. Good evening, everyone. It's Tuesday, the 10th of August, slightly after 6 p.m. We're just about on time. I'm Mayor Patrick Hall, and welcome to the City of Canning's agenda briefing for this evening. At item 1, declarations. I now declare the meeting open. We start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet this evening, and we also pay our respects to elders both past and present. Tonight's briefing is for the purpose of asking questions and seeking clarification on agenda items for the next ordinary council meeting, which is held next Tuesday evening. No decision making or entering into of debate is to occur at this meeting. May I ask everyone present to turn off all electronic devices, and that is mobile devices, iPads and tablets, particularly those in the public gallery, thank you very much, for the duration of the briefing, and that's because it interferes with the recording equipment in the room here. Tonight's agenda briefing is being recorded. A copy of the audio recording shall be available on the City's website within 72 hours of the meeting. Agenda briefings are public meetings, and any information you may provide may be publicly accessible. And just on that tonight, I'm pleased to advise that we're going to do just a dry run this evening of live streaming. We'll be live streaming the audio of our meetings from next week's OCM meeting. So tonight we're going to make sure we've got IT sitting in the wings just to monitor and make sure that everything is fine. And then from next week we'll be live streaming the audio of these meetings from there on. Karen, did you want to switch across just so they can check it, or you've already done that? All fine, thank you, Governance. Disclosures of interest. The prescribed disclosure requirements apply to meetings that are convened under the provisions of the Local Government Act. However, it may be perceived as ethically unacceptable and at odds with the probity and accountability principles of the Act and codes of conduct for elected members to participate in forums, briefings or workshops where they are aware they have a conflict of interest and do not declare it. In the interests of openness and accountability, elected members are encouraged to disclose a conflict of interest where they are aware they have one when attending a forum, briefing or workshop, and where applicable, remove themselves from the room while the matter is being discussed. At item 2 of tonight's agenda, apologies. There are none. We have the full council present this evening. Thank you, councillors. Approve leave of absence. There are no approved leave of absence requests. Disclosures of interest. CEO, have we got any disclosures of interest received this evening?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, not at this time.
Thank you. Item 4, question time for the public. Response to previous question taken on notice. Responses to any previous questions taken on notice will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda. Questions from the public. The time for public questions is 15 minutes, and that's been set aside, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to items listed on tonight's agenda paper. For recording purposes, please state your name and address and then proceed to ask your question. And if an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with policy AD02, members of the public who have registered their interest to ask questions with the City's administration shall be called upon in the order in which registrations were received. Written questions will precede verbal questions. I open public question time now at 4 minutes past 6 p.m. Do I have any questions from the public gallery? Thank you. That being the case, we do have a number of questions we've received this evening from Mr Bill Prince of Bow Street in Wilson. He submitted those questions in writing. He has provided 5 questions. Under the standing orders, generally we only allow 3. In the absence of any other questions being asked tonight from the gallery, and considering Mr Bill Prince has offered these 5 in good faith, I'll allow them to be read. I'll ask the relevant director, Director Graham Bride. Director, can I get you just to read the questions and then the response from the City for the public record? I understand we'll also be providing a written response to Mr Prince.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The first question is the officer recommendation 1 to 6 of item CD 020-21 does not mention attachment 3, the proposed Castledare local structure plan. Am I correct in assuming that Council is voting on scheme amendment number 5 to local planning scheme number 42, which does not include attachment 3? The answer is yes. Council is only considering the scheme amendment proposal. The local structure plan map was included for reference purposes and will be subject to a future separate council report post-advertising. Question 2, will attachment 3 be included in the 42-day advertising period? Answer is yes. If council agrees to advertise the scheme amendment, the local structure plan will be advertised at the same time, and the local structure plan will be advertised with a range of studies, including environmental and traffic reports. Question 3, if passed, will all residents of Bow Street, Wilson, be notified of the scheme amendment number 5 to local planning scheme number 42 at the commencement of the 42-day advertising period? Please note that the development of Lot 4 Fern Road, as proposed in attachment 3, will impact on all residents in Bow Street. Response number 3, the amendment will be advertised widely and placed on the city's Your Say platform, accessible on the city's website. Both sides of Bow Street will be within the consultation area as per the city's local planning policy LP.02 and will be invited to comment on the proposal. Question 4, is the additional road reserve indicated along Fern Road, lots 100 and 102, sufficient to protect the root mats of the mature eucalypts in the area? Answer is the width of the reserve containing the trees currently shown as road reserve is approximately 8 metres and is sufficient for the root area. Question 5, what is the maximum number of dwellings that could be constructed on Lot 4 Fern Road? Has council considered the extra traffic that will use Bow Street to access Fern Road if Bywater Way is extended into Lot 4? It is difficult enough to enter Fern Road from Bow Street during the morning rat run without extra traffic being added to the area. Entry onto Fern Road west of Bungaree roundabout will also be slowed by traffic from lots 100 and 102. And final response, the scheme amendment proposes to zone the land to urban development. The local structure plan will be advertised concurrently with the scheme amendment and will identify the proposed road network and density of the development. The density identified on the draft local structure plan map is R25, which would yield around 49 lots. A traffic impact assessment will be attached to the structure plan, and residents can comment on this plan along with all the other appendices as per paragraph 16 of the August agenda briefing report.
Director, having problems getting my microphone to turn on. Thank you, Director. In the absence of any further questions on the floor, we'll move to item 4.3, which is deputations. And I understand, a number of deputations have been approved tonight. The first of which is by Mr. Mark Szabo. It's regarding item CD 020 of 21. Mr. Szabo, are you present? Thank you. I'll ask you to please step forward. You have up to 10 minutes to make your deputation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's Mitch Bisbee, I'm afraid. I think my colleague Mark Szabo, and also joined by Peter Dockett from Richard Noble. They're acting on behalf of the registered landowners, the Christian Brothers. So first of all, good evening, Mayor and councillors. I would first of all like to thank the officers for their positive recommendation and their report. I think provides a very good overview of the proposal and the pertinent issues. So I would mainly like to provide a little bit of background behind the proposal and a bit of an overview of how we've approached things. So amendment number 5 is really the latest step in a process to renew the site, in an arrangement that's been discussed over the last few years between the city, the state government and Richard Noble as a representative of the Christian Brothers. We consider that it provides quite a few benefits to the broader community. I think the main one will be the ceding of over 12 hectares of parks and recreation reserve to the Crown, completely free of cost. So in terms of background, the Christian Brothers have owned the site for close to a century. Pursuant to the Brothers' commitment to support the community, its stewardship has seen the site and its surrounds used for the education of underprivileged children and then the care and accommodation of the elderly. The community spirit extends to the Castlederm Miniature Railway, which has enjoyed informal tenure on the site since it was established in 1963. That's enabled its volunteers to provide valued experiences to the community and fundraise some significant amounts to support a number of community organisations. I think additionally, there's been informal public access through the land for quite some time, and that provides some important recreation functions to the community. I think this is mainly the path that runs along, which helps provide a contiguous cycling and walking corridor along the edge of the Canning River Regional Reserve. I think with that broader context in mind, Amendment 5 itself is generally fairly straightforward. It seeks to mainly allow for the implementation of a structure plan that will guide residential development over a part of the site which is free of environmental constraints and that has been largely vacant since 1961. So this amendment follows an MRS amendment process, which concluded in November last year. So the original MRS, which we can see here, shows some areas of Parks and Recreation Reserve, which sleeved around a small area of urban. So the amendment that followed looked to introduce another area of urban development and a portion of the site which is free of constraints. This is an area that's largely cleared, it's just grassland, and also looks to, I think, resume an extra bit of land for Parks and Recreation Reserve to accommodate infrastructure associated with the Castledare Miniature Railway. I think another important aspect of it was that the area of Parks and Recreation was very specifically conceived to accommodate all of the significant environmental features of the area. So that includes the wetland boundaries of the wetlands, I think, particularly associated with the river to the east. It also accommodates the foreshore areas associated with river and all the buffers as well associated with those things. So that ensures that all of those are contained within the recreation reserve to ensure their ongoing protection. So this means that the urban area is largely unaffected by these values. So as we can see as well, I think the area of urban is very much in the minority. The area of Parks and Recreation comprises about 80% of the site. So moving now onto the area of the urban zone portion, so the outlined areas, I think, to the north and south, which are fairly discrete small cells there. So the current scheme zoning has an area of private community purposes, which is largely a legacy issue that interfaces with areas of existing urban development zoned land, and that was done through that previous MRS amendment process. So what we are looking to do now is to amend that so it's a little so it's more consistent and provides that scope to be able to implement the structure plan. So as officers noted, the structure plan has been submitted so that they can be considered together through the amendment process after the initiation. So looking now towards some of the site attributes, so we can see some of the main features include obviously existing trees, the Castledare Miniature Railway and some of the associated buildings, including Niana Station. We also, of course, have the Castledare Homestead and the existing church and a miniature golf course as well. So we've looked as part of our design process for the structure plan to how we can help respond to these issues. So all of those we think have been encapsulated fairly well. One of the main issues, of course, that was brought up with those questions that we heard earlier is that the landscape value of the trees is obviously quite significant and something that is really important to the character of the area. So all the trees which are currently on site we're endeavouring to retain. So we've worked quite hard with the engineers and also with an arborist to ensure that everything that's currently on site is safe and can be kept. So that includes trees that will be within lots. I think areas such as along Fern Road where we've had a strip of public open space, or that will be public open space that was originally shown as road reserve, that will be used to retain trees, as well as areas where we've looked to narrow road reserves so that we can keep them and create an overall benefit for the community. I think importantly as well, some of the other design aspects allow for a road interface to the area of Parks and Recreation Reserve that ensures it's always manageable, that we don't have a direct backyard interface which can be difficult to manage as well. So this accords with the requirements put forward by the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation and Department of Biodiversity Conservation and Attractions as well. I think another important aspect of the structure plan will be a sensitive interface to the existing uses. So we've maintained an R25 density code, which is exactly the same as the surrounding land. Importantly, we're also, as I said, we're aiming to retain all of those existing trees, and all of them have been shored up to ensure that they are healthy. So if we step back, we can see the context of those urban uses in relation to the area of Parks and Recreation, which are to be given up. So it's important to consider in Amendment number 5, and as well as the structure plan when that comes before you, is that these are really concerned with guiding residential development on urban zoned land. So the environmentally significant areas, as I said, were assessed and they're located in the Parks and Recreation Reserve that was considered through that MRS amendment. As such, we're only really concerned with sort of how we interface to those issues because they're not directly impacted by the development in that urban area. So in terms of benefits, Amendment number 5 will play a fairly significant part in securing a number of benefits through this renewal process. First of all, it will secure public ownership of an important part of the Canning River Regional Park. I think this will really help the implementation of regional management measures. It will also enable the delivery of regional recreation facilities, including a shared path that's been identified through the city's cycle strategy. It will also help to cement the financial sustainability of the Castlederm Miniature Railway, as grant funding will become available to them once they've formalised their tenure on public land. I think the Castlederm Miniature Railway has been consulted quite extensively throughout the process, and some of the design attributes of the structure plan respond specifically to their needs as well, including access requirements, and they've been supportive of the process. Planning will continue to refine and put a framework in place to protect some of those environmental and landscape values that I've talked about. I think to date we've had dozens of site investigations and management strategies that have gone through. So this includes investigations into contamination, including significant decontamination works through the site. So all the urban zoned areas have been managed so that they are decontaminated. We've also looked at wetland and foreshore boundaries. As I said, through that MRS amendment process, there were investigations to ensure that they were adequately identified and accommodated within that PNR reserve. I think we've also looked at soil, landform and vegetation composition and biophysical values as well. Hydrology and stormwater management's been considered in quite extensive detail, as would be required, particularly next to the watercourse. Bushfire risk has also been considered as something that will be associated with a permanent risk of that Parks and Recreation Reserve. So lastly, it will also make efficient use of urban zone land, which is relatively underutilised and in an area where there's a known need for additional housing opportunities. So in summary, the amendment area has sat vacant for many decades and is surplus to the Christian Brothers requirements. It's devoid of environmental value, containing only grasses and scattered mature trees, with again sort of those significant areas located outside of the amendment and structure plan areas. This provides a great opportunity to deliver some comprehensively planned residential uses on a site that's ideally located for it. I think it's got access to existing services and amenities without need for any additional significant infrastructure. I think it's also one of the few opportunities available in the city to deliver this kind of development, because of course being quite close to the city, I think there are very few sites where we can reasonably do this. Thank you. Perhaps most importantly, as I said, it will facilitate seeding over 12 hectares of park and recreation reserve free of cost, securing public ownership of an important piece of the Canning River Regional Reserve. So I'd like to thank Council for hearing our deputation. I think myself, my colleague Mark and Peter Dockett from Richard Noble are happy to answer any queries that you might have. We're also happy to extend an invitation to councillors if they would like to come out on site at all throughout the process to have a look and talk through any issues.
Thank you for coming along this evening. Thank you. Our second deputation this evening is from Mrs. Sian Mawson regarding CC 040 of 21. Ms Mawson, can I invite you to step forward, please? You have up to 10 minutes in which to make your deputation. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sian Mawson from 86 Gibb Street, East Cannington. Tonight I want to talk to you about item CC 040 of 21, proposed disposal of portion of lot 326, number 46 to 50, Hartfield Street, Queen's Park, or Hartfield Park. This item is confidential, so I don't know any of the details, but the title alone was enough to get me up here tonight before you. With just the title to guide me, this is what I think this item is about. I know we're talking about Hartfield Park in Queen's Park. The title indicates that we're talking about a portion of Hartfield Park, so some of the park, but not all of it. I don't know which part, and for the purpose of this deputation, which part is immaterial. And we're told that this part will be disposed of. I've learnt that the word disposal can mean one of two things. The land will either be leased or sold. Leasing a park seems unlikely, so I'll assume we're talking about selling. So my interpretation of the title is that the city is proposing to sell some of Hartfield Park. As I've said before, I don't know any of the details of this item, so I'm going out on a limb here with a guess. As Hartfield Park is in a residential area, I'm going to assume that part of the park is proposed to be sold for residential purposes. I will be using my time this evening to talk about what we stand to lose by selling off part of Hartfield Park for housing. In 2018, the Council adopted the Local Biodiversity Strategy. Amongst other things, this strategy talks about ecological linkages and creating stepping stones between larger patches of native vegetation. Hartfield Park sits within an ecological linkage described in the strategy, and provides a stepping stone for wildlife travelling between the remnant vegetation owned and being restored by Sister Kate's Home Kids Aboriginal Corporation and the Queen's Park Regional Open Space. The local biodiversity strategy has a target to revegetate at least 250 hectares of degraded or cleared land. Hartfield Park, instead of being sold for housing, could be revegetated and count towards a 250 hectare target. While Hartfield Park is small, it is only through the retention of these small parcels that we have any chance of reaching that goal. Our natural environment has suffered its decline through small incremental cuts, and its repair will require the same approach. The city's urban forest strategy includes discussion about the urban heat island effect and shows Queen's Park as having one of the highest average temperatures in the city. The strategy says that research has confirmed that parks and shaded areas are cooler than surrounding exposed surfaces, and that the best strategy to mitigate future heat island impacts is an extensive and well-linked urban forest. Hartfield Park has some established trees that are already working to combat the urban heat island effect. By selling a portion of Hartfield Park, we will be diminishing the environmental services that the park currently provides. The remaining land will be less inviting for wildlife due to its reduced size and proportionately concentrated human activity. And the urban heat island effect will be increased as current canopy is turned into housing and paved areas. It is true that the city has planted 3,000 street trees in the nearby streets this winter and that they will replace the lost canopy. But street trees cannot replace the habitat provided by a whole ecosystem that is needed by most wildlife. Street trees can only support those animals that are able to spend their whole lives in the canopy. Most native fauna need other types of vegetation, such as mid-storey, understory and ground litter, in order to survive. There will be a boost to the city's finances from the sale of this land, but it isn't essential to the survival of the city. As was advised at the Ordinary Council meeting on 18th of May 2021, in response to a question from the gallery, the city doesn't need to sell land to prop up its financial situation. The city has other ways to make ends meet. I hope that I'm wrong, and the reality is that it is proposed that Hartfield Park will be sold to a benevolent entity to be revegetated and used for the long-term support of the environment. If that is the case, then I apologise for taking up your time this evening. But I think that selling it for housing is much more likely. While deliberating this proposal, please consider the needs of the local biodiversity and urban forest strategies and the environment. Anyone who has taken an interest in the local wildlife over the last 20 years or more will have seen some species decline in abundance or distribution. Loss of habitat has been partly to blame for that decline. We now have a chance to reverse the situation, or at least stop it becoming any worse. Please don't sell any part of Hartfield Park. Save it for the environment's sake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thanks for coming along this evening. That's the last of the two deputations we have tonight. Item 5, items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public gallery. There are none. Reports of committee meetings, there are none this evening. Reports from the Chief Executive Officer's Directorate, there are none this evening. We'll lead off with item CC 039 of 21, the responsible officer being Director Warren Bowe, the Director of Canning Corporate and Commercial. The title of that report being late item, Monthly Financial Report, July 2021. The recommendation is on page 2 of the circulated late agenda and is also on the screen right now. Councillors, do you have any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few, but as a consolation, I don't have many more for the rest of the evening. So if you bear with me, please. The first question is in relation to item 16, D on page 9. Now, it's easy for me to say this than try and explain it in an email or anything else. And I presume you may... Have you got this open, Mr. Kane? No? It doesn't matter.
Director Bowe's the responsible officer.
Oh, sorry.
Did you want to just direct it to?
Yep.
through the
Okay,
chair,
so 16D, just in relation to that, the question I asked is, does this mean that the carry forwards from 2021, which were adopted in last year's budget, are now having to be re-adopted by council again, or will some be reclassified and council be notified of such changes? And I say that apart from the 2 or 3 year projects that are carry forwards. You can take these on notice.
Do you want to just deal with that? We'll just deal with that first.
Okay.
You're happy to take them on notice if we
I can answer that, Mr.
I'll
Mayor,
give,
if I can.
I'll let Director Bowe answer
Yep.
the first one. Director Bowe.
As has been the custom and practice in previous years, the first budget review of the financial year, the council is asked to endorse the carry forward projects from the previous financial year, and it's included as a budget amendment.
Okay,
Councillor
so
Barry.
21. The 3.71 million that I presume that's at June 31st.
Is that at the same spot?
Yeah, we're
Just a
just
reference to it?
scrolling down, yep. No, it's 0.21, so 16 going to 21. And there's an outstanding amount of rates, 3.7 at June. I'll assume that's June 30th. The question is that on par with last year's?
Director, will be able to
Take it
tell us
on
whether
notice,
that's
it's
on
already-
par?
If I could just clarify, thanks, Mr. Mayor. You're talking about paragraph 21, Councillor Barry?
Yeah, and the graph, Director Bowe. The red
That's
line?
actually the revenue collected to date. Given that we issued the rates notice earlier than normal, we've collected 3.97.
3.7 is it prior years? It says outstanding, is it? Is that correct? The red line?
No, the 3.97
Yes.
referenced in paragraph 21 and indicated in the below graph is the revenue collected.
Okay, so 3.71 is what you're forecasting to be the deficit at the end of the year?
No, that was representative of the outstanding debts last financial year at that time.
You're not going so well so far?
No,
Keep
that's
going.
what I'm asking.
Yes,
Is
like,
the
I'm
outstanding
old.
debt of what you forecast there the same as last year's?
And I imagine it's till the 30th of June, is it? The June quarter? CEO, did you want to just
Thank
quickly?
you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reference to the figure in June for this year's forecast is the estimate at the end of the financial year, where we expect to be at the end of the financial year, 21-22. So the rate collection process shows what's been collected earlier this year, but you'll still, each year will always end up with a proportion of rates that aren't collected. These are deferred rates and carried forward. As we're saying, we're currently estimating at 3.71 million.
Thank
Yes.
you. Councillor?
I suppose the crux of my question was in comparison to the year gone.
Of
Through the
what
chair.
has been collected so far?
No.
Through the
At the
chair.
end of the last year. I mean,
CEO.
we're forecasting,
Through the chair, the forecast is consistent with prior years, so
Okay.
we're not expecting any level of rate collection to be under what we had collected in previous years.
okay, I had another one on 28, but I might use the week to try and type that up because I'm not having too much joy in explaining myself here.
You can always ask the question after the meeting. We'll obviously have time after that, but you're right. I mean, it is easier, as I've explained previously. You can get the
Yeah.
answers if you email them in.
Yeah, like I understand that, Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor, but I mean, I just finished writing these out myself this afternoon, so I wasn't going to double handle
All
it.
right.
So.
Well, you've got another week to sort it out.
41, reinstatement. It says with the reinstatement of the annual transfers to reserve from municipal fund for the 21-22 financial year, the city will have funds available within the community sporting reserve facility. It is recommended that the loan could be funded from this reserve, thereby not having the overall impact on the adopted budget deficit for the 21-22 year. My question is, how much funding is currently in the community sporting facility reserve? Is this a one-off budgetary allocation? And if so, what is the annual cap?
Director Bowe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can provide the balance of the reserve to all councillors and answer the other questions from Councillor Barry.
Thank
We'll
you.
take that on notice to give you an answer in writing.
Thank you. 48, it says the reported opening surplus is a draft surplus and presented at the same time preparation of this report and is subject to further changes on account of the end of the year, closing journals, accruals, balance day adjustments, transfer to and from reserves. The reported surplus and financial statements will also be subject to a year extended external audit expected to completed in November. I suppose the question I'm asking then is that, does that mean that essentially our budget is running over an 18-month period before all things are reconciled?
Director Bowe.
I might ask the CEO to answer that one. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the budget cycle itself doesn't run over the 12 months, but the accounting for it does.
Yeah.
So you have the 12-month transaction reconciliations. Then you have to complete the finalisation of any matters related to last financial year, which we're still doing now. The results are audited. The audit is presented to council. So if you look from the elapsed time before a council adopted a budget, it would be actually over more than 18-month cycle that you complete this process over.
Councillor.
Yeah, okay, so my next question is then in relation to, and I really don't know if I just can't read this or what. It's the graph for the statement of the net current assets. And it says current assets.
Which page are you referring to there?
Page 6. And it says 2021 actuals for the current assets was $69 million, rounded down. 2022 is 172 million. What does that suggest? I mean,
Director Bowe, have you been able to find it in the report, or would you like to provide that on notice? You want some clarification around those numbers, obviously.
More so on the page numbers. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
The page number that you gave, number 6.
Page 19, sorry, it's page 6 and then page 19.
Page number 19, Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to take that question on notice.
Yeah,
We'll take that on notice.
Okay,
Thank you, Councillor.
And then we go to the investment profile reserve funds. Now, I think I asked a similar question. I'm not sure if it's similar, but I'll ask again. If the Bentley Regen, because it's no longer part of the reserve fund details, so I'm assuming that's gone. So if the Bentley Regen is now fully expended, does that mean the city has paid for the Multicultural Centre, Hillview Park, Ashburton, Chapman Park and Wyong Recreation refurb in advance? If it's not the case, where is the money from the Bentley Regen Trust allocated?
Director, you're able to...
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
answer
We
that
haven't paid for
more
Wyong or the Chapman or Ashburton in advance, but I will follow up in relation to the status of the Bentley Regen Reserve.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've got and I'll rattle through them, about a half a dozen of the warrant listings, and I'll just give you the number.
If you just give us the references and we'll get back to you on them. Yep. 035172, Curtin University Education, 75,000 Ks. I'd like to know what that's for, please. 035227, 10,000 or 10.6, presenter and speaker series to Sister Kate's. My question is there any other Aboriginal organisations within the city that have been asked, or is it just Sister Kate's that do it? 03.5246, 5.5 is a grant and sponsorship for ESP Property Proprietary Limited. I'd like to know what that's for, please. 035516, personal recruitment from Lester Blades Recruitment. I'm just curious as to what position that was for. ARRB 033570, Asset Management Services, $172,000. I'm just curious to what that's for. And 035747, 800,000 for Western Power. Is that for usage or is it new infrastructure? That's all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I can probably answer one of Councillor Barry's questions with
I
my
don't think
question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just ask your question.
Yes. So the reserve account for the community and sporting facility reserve account's got just under 280,000. The WBA loan out of that is going to be 253, obviously only leaving about 20,000 left over. Is this one of our reserve funds that replenishes every financial year or every budget cycle? Or are we going to have to wait 10 years to get that funding back up to this level?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, that you've noticed in the earlier reference to Councillor Barry, the reserve funds were reinstated. So it was paused during the COVID budget, 1920 or 2021. It's now reinstated, so there's been a reserve transfer to that fund. And as long as Council continues that, it will get a reserve transaction every year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Barry? Surely not.
I suppose the question was, do we have a cap? Is that community fund capped at, say, 500,000, a million, or what? Thank you.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, it has no formal cap. Cap can obviously be applied any budget year by limiting the reserve transaction into it. But in the past, my understanding is it's never had a balance more than, say, a couple of $100,000.
Thank you. Councillor Ponaturo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Director Bo or to CEO. Same question as at the net current assets. I too noticed they're from 6 million 2021 actuals to 2022 114 jump. So I just wanted to know, is any particular receivables are we getting? Mostly receivables will somebody have to pay us, or what are the customers?
Director
So
Bo,
it's something, it's a big jump. So that's what I'm asking.
Director Bo, are you able to answer that?
Not
take it on
at the
notice?
moment. I'll take it on notice. Thanks.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Mayor.
councillor. Councillor Kunza?
Yeah, just with respect to point 7 of the officer recommendation, should that actually, in terms of how it's written, actually say where it's been allocated to? And second, will the payments made by the WBA go back into the reserve where it's been taken from?
Director, is that the intent?
That is the intent, Mr Mayor, and we can tidy up the recommendation to give greater clarity there, Councillor Kunza.
Councillor Holland, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You're just a couple, pardon me, a couple. I was just curious of why we're paying the City of South Perth nearly over $28,000 was one thing, which is 035200 if you want that. You can get back to me on that if you need to. The other one was the way this is written here, so I'm not too sure actually how it is because it's not actually clear. It's either 035219 or 035220, Whaleback Golf Course Management Proprietary Sport and Recreational Activity Service, 38, nearly 39,000. Curious what we're paying that for. Sorry?
I think the CEO is...
There's another one in there as well, and there's another one in there as well. And the last one is that I got your response back, thank you very much, on my question at the last ACM regarding the amount of money that we spent on outside staff. Are we going to be expecting this because it's $151,000 again this month, is that going to be a normal run-of-the-mill amount, 150, 160, 180,000 every month?
Director Bo?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just for clarity, the response that I provided to Councillor Holland was in relation to agency staff, not necessarily outdoor staff, as was referenced. Yeah, I was just, for the record, clarifying that it was agency staff. As detailed in the response, there are a number of positions that are being held over, pending backfilling of those positions and also a revision of the service levels, as explained in the email. That figure aims to be reduced quite significantly and quite quickly, so I wouldn't anticipate anywhere near that amount of expenditure over the coming few months.
CEO, did you want to just provide some context around the Whaleback inquiry? I understand some of those works are about to occur.
I can. I think because there are two questions Councillor Holland's asked on a while back, it might be easier to put them both in the email. And because if I answer the one, I'm not sure it's the answer I'm going to give is the question he's asked.
So there's two line items there for expenditure at Whaleback. Is that what you're saying, Councillor Holland? You wanted to know what it was about?
So there's only one transaction warrant? Again,
Sorry,
is there
you've
any-
answered one of them, have you?
Well, there will be. Is there only one transaction a while back you're querying in the warrant listing?
No, I understand there's two
That's
transactions.
why. So I know the answer for one, but I'll have to go back and look at the answer for the other. It's probably easy to give you the answers both at the same time.
I know the recheck is due to start soon, but it hasn't started yet, so as you keep it, and the City of South Perth.
Terrific, done. Thanks, councillors. We might move on then if you don't have any further questions. Thank you. We'll move on to CD 020 of 21. The title of this item is Initiation of Scheme Amendment number 5 of Local Planning Scheme number 42 for Lot 4 Fern Road and Lot 100 and 102 Castlemere Place in Wilson. Mr Graham Bride, to my right, is the responsible officer, being the Director of Canning Development. Councillors, only relevant questions are in relation to just the recommendation in front of you, and that is on the screen and also appears on page 5. Any questions? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. 5 questions, if I may, please. The applicant has submitted a local structure plan, but it seems, going by the officer recommendation, that it has yet to be approved by the city, suggesting that information is missing. Can the city elaborate as to what information is missing, please?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, there was a couple of things we requested need to be modified. One was, if you looked at the Fern Road area where the trees were being retained, I think the structure plan map showed it as road reserve. We wanted that changed to public open space. It still has the same, retention authority, but we thought that's a pretty important change. The one that's up for further discussion is the foreshore management plan. You'll note in the report, the applicant is wanting to give the land to the West Australian Planning Commission to manage post the subdivision, and taking the land as is, and the West Australian Planning Commission would then undertake the management of that reserve. So that's certainly one plan that we believe is the only really major plan that's missing. So all the bushfire management, the traffic, the environmental report, the drainage, hydrology, we've got all that information we need to advertise the plan. It's just whether or not the Commission is wanting a foreshore management plan, given that they are, I guess, the authority that's taking over the management of that reserve.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
Would it also, if it's possible, for the city to provide some sort of flow chart for the ordinary council meeting paper showing the application process and the elements involved, please?
Director.
Through Mr Mayor, certainly we can do that. So we'll add that as another attachment.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
At this stage of the process, the dual use path will not be constructed unless it is paid for by the DPLH or the landowner. Is that correct?
Director.
This particular item that council is considering is just the rezoning, but certainly when council looks at the local structure plan, one of the decisions or one of the issues it'll have to address is whether the dual use path should be shown on that plan. And in terms of the funding of that, it would either be the developer or the West Australian Planning Commission accepts the reserve without it and funds it itself. So certainly we believe that the developer should fund that as part of a future subdivision. But that's really one of the issues that the West Australian Planning Commission is working at the moment.
Councillor Bain.
So in addition to that, might I also raise the replacement or the repairing of the river wall in that context, please?
Director.
Yes, that's another matter. So there's a couple of infrastructure issues with that reserve that the city would like addressed by the developer, and that's why the foreshore management plan, which identifies the upgrading of that infrastructure, we believe is really important. So if the city was ever asked into the future whether it would take on the management of that reserve, these are the things that really need to be addressed before the city would even contemplate that.
One last one. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Would it also be able to provide on one of the maps where the set-down area will be? Thank you.
Director.
Through Mr Mayor, that might be a bit difficult because it's quite a while down the path. So obviously the structure plan's the next step. Then there's the subdivision application. And that's the stage at which, they'll start to look at a construction management plan. So that'll be a condition of the subdivision that they prepare a construction management plan, and that would identify where the set down area is. But I will ask the applicant if they've got any ideas as to where they are likely to have that particular set down area.
Thanks, Councillor Bain. Councillor Saberi.
I think my question sort of goes back to what Councillor Bain was asking around paragraph 25. I feel for Councillor to make a decision, we need more clarity around this paragraph. And so I guess when you're saying that they're going to give up the land before the subdivision stage, does that mean that, what does that mean? Does that mean that when can we, I guess, how can we ensure that there's going to be a management plan, and how are the council's interests going to be secured, and obviously environment values?
Director.
It's quite vague.
Through Mr. Mayor. A couple of things in relation to that question. The land would only be given up as part of the subdivision stage. So it's not being given up prior to the subdivision stage. There's a couple of stages to go, but certainly if the subdivision's approved, as part of the creation of those 49 lots, they would also give up the land at that point for the public open space. In terms of the environmental reporting, as I said, the structure plan is coming with a number of appendices, and that will certainly be circulated to council prior to any advertising of that plan. And all those studies will be put out to public consultation, and that'll come back to council to consider all of those aspects, including the environmental issues and the foreshore management as well.
Councillor Saberi, anything else? No? Happy with that? Councillor Ponaturo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a simple question: is one of the recommendations mentioned to address the need for additional housing in the city of Canning? So where did we capture this data, and do we know there's more population, or where are we capturing this data? Thank you.
Through Mr. Mayor, we do have the stats. We sign up to Canning Profile ID, which is a demographic company that provides all the city's demographic information. So we do have that information of how many lots are being created, how many dwellings are being approved. But certainly we have our local planning strategy, which basically sets the vision for the future development of the city over a 20-year period. So we know where all the development areas are to be located and what sort of infill figures we're looking at. So that information is contained within our local planning strategy and identifies where these housing areas are.
Anything else? Thank you. Councillor Ponaturo.
Thank you. This REM plan, which does the Canning Profile ID, they predicted in 2016 we're going to have 100,000 people, but it didn't happen because when the mining boom went down, people actually migrated from Canning and went to eastern states. And of course now everybody wants to come back to Western Australia with the current situation. But are they able to provide us what's the population? Because to my knowledge, where I have seen the latest one is Canning population still 94,000. It's slight movement happening, but I'm very keen to know. I would like to have more people to come to live in Canning, but
just a question. What
my question is what's the population now? And where did it change from last 6 months or 3 months? Where is the variation?
Director?
Thank you.
Through Mr. Mayor, it's about 94,000 at the moment. Obviously, census night's tonight, so we'll get a better picture of what the population is probably in a couple of years. Unfortunately, it takes a fair bit of time, but at the moment it's about 94,000. We generally have around 700 new dwellings per year, so that's probably equating to around about 1,400 people a year based on the last couple of years.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney.
Just under the financial considerations, paragraph 24, the internal budget, work undertaken for the amendment has been funded from the strategic planning budget. Can I just ask how much that is?
Director?
Through Mr. Mayor, that's the officer time in processing the proposal. So it's difficult to identify how many hours the officers will be spending on this, but it's covered through their wages or the salaries budget. They work on a number of proposals from applicants. And there is a fee that's attached to this particular application as well. So there's an incoming revenue which covers the officer's assessment time.
Councillor Sweeney.
Just one more supplementary question if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've looked at this before. I just, why isn't this cost consumed in the application process and paid for, in this case, by the landowner? I just wanted some clarification on that, why we won't pass those costs on.
Director.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we do keep records for scheme amendments and structure plans as to how many hours we do work on these, and then we do charge the applicant for our time. So there is an ability, and we do it, to retrieve the costs for scheme amendments and structure plan proposals.
Councillor Sweeney.
Okay, so it's really by choice on whether we get an application, and how does that work? It's a bit unclear for me at this stage. I understand the answer, but it doesn't sound like it happens every single time we go through one of these applications.
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, there's development applications which are very easy. They're based on development value. When it comes to scheme amendments, which are these type of proposals, we don't get too many of these, but scheme amendments and structure plans, the fee is set by council or the city's officers coming up with a summary or an average figure, and then basically we keep a record of our hours in terms of how much time we've spent assessing it, and then we can charge the applicant, which we do, for our time in assessing those proposals. But it's only for these type of proposals we do that, and that's consistent with the regulations. So the regulations gives us the maximum fees that we can charge, and when it comes to amendments and structure plans, it's on an hour-by-hour basis. We initially get an average figure, and then we reconcile that at the end, and we send them a bill for any balance.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Barry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in relation to that, I mean, point 1 says that scheme amendment number 5 is a standard amendment. So do we have different gradients, or is this like a Welga template? Or
Director.
Yeah, under the regulations, when adopting a scheme amendment, the council has to include in its resolution whether it's either a standard, basic or complex amendment. So there's 3 categories. Standard probably takes up 95% of amendments, and we have to then identify reasons why we believe it's a standard amendment. So it's just a category that council, through its resolution, has to identify.
And just 2 more small ones, just in relation to what the gentleman, I think it was from Richard Noble, is that correct?
It was, they're gone.
They're gone? I'm just wondering, in the northwest corner on page 6 of that red outline, that used to be gypsum cum asbestos dump many years ago. I'm just wondering, is there a contamination report on any part of this block?
Director Bride.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, they have done quite significant asbestos removal.
All right.
And the area that's identified for urban development has been completely decontaminated.
Yep.
And the area that is subject to the wider reserve has been downgraded in terms of a restricted use. So that's the bit that's going back to the state.
Yeah.
Has been remediated for restricted use, so passive recreation.
Okay,
Councillor?
and I presume then that forms part of that asbestos management plan 27A?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that was a requirement so that the ongoing use of that land to which the asbestos has been treated, there's a requirement for a long-term asbestos management plan, and they have done that, and that's part of the local structure plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Just on clarifying a little bit more on that. So the land that they're giving back to the state government's worthless land to them anyway, because you can't develop on it anyway. Is that what you're saying?
Director.
Yeah, there's a portion of the land that has been used. Well, there was asbestos material dumped on the land over many years, and that bit of land has been remediated. It's been capped, it's been treated, and it matches the intended use of the reserve. So you could say the value of the land, given it's mostly conservation, it's mostly vegetated, and it's got a bit of remediated or treated asbestos material, you could argue that the value of it on the market is quite low, but in terms of the biodiversity, the 12 hectares is quite a considerable value for the community.
But you couldn't develop it anyway.
Director?
No, that restriction on the asbestos-treated material, you can't develop over that.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Holland. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next item, which is CD 022 of 21, and that's in relation to the initiation of scheme amendment number 4 to local planning scheme number 42, being lot 579 in brackets number 1096 Albany Highway in St James. The recommendation is on page 21 of the agenda, and it is on screen right now. Councillors, any questions in relation to that item? None. Councillor Severi?
I'm just wondering about the, I guess, the houses around the block of land that they're proposing to, I guess, build multiple stories. Are they residential houses? And do we know that if they're currently residential, if the actual owners live in them? Do we have that information, or?
Director, are you able to provide some information for the councillor?
Yes, Mr Mayor, we can certainly just work out the occupancy and whether they are renters or landowners, occupiers. In terms of the use of that land, or surrounding use, this area is part of the Albany Highway Transport Corridor. So whilst the current, I guess, built form is quite low density in some respect, that'll change over the next 5 to 10 years. And there already is, as you can see on the bottom of the aerial, there's obviously a car yard, an old car yard, there's an existing chemist, medical centre. So there is a mix of sort of commercial and residential uses already in that particular block of land. And certainly if council does agree to advertise this amendment, all those landowners will be asked to comment on it.
We'll get those details to you.
That's fine. I just was wondering in general. So when we reclassify that, is it that we're just going to reclassify that portion, or is it going to be is the surrounding land as well, or is that an option? Because
Director?
The intention of this amendment is just to add additional use rights for that lot. So the lots around it would stay R80 residential, but this particular lot, the intention is to have an additional use so that a shop and medical centre would apply only to that lot. So the intention is not to apply these additional uses along that whole stretch.
Thanks, Director. Councillor Sweeney?
Mr Bright, is this the first time we've had an application of this type of amendment for this block of land?
Director?
As far as I'm aware, Mr Mayor, this is the first application over this land. We do have additional uses are quite common. So if you look at our town planning scheme, there's a whole range of properties throughout the city which have got an additional use right. So they've got all the land uses allowed in their zone, plus another 1 or 2 land uses which they've gone through a rezoning for. So it's not uncommon to have additional uses applied to different properties of land.
Thank you. Anyone else, councillors, before we move on? Councillor Payne?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Can the City please expand on the applicant's comments that its lease at the current site is uncertain, and has the City set a time frame or a future date on the expansion of Albany Highway in that area? Thank you.
Director?
I might take those 2 questions on notice and get back to all councillors.
Thank you. Thanks, councillors. We'll move on now to, let me see, CD 024 of 21. That's in relation to the City of Canning CAT local laws. Are there any questions in relation to that? Thank you. We'll move on to CD 025 of 21. That's the City of Canning fencing local law. Any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Hunza.
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. With Schedule 2B and the front setback, it mentions that you can't build a front wall higher than 1,200 millimetres without approval from the city. What is the criteria for getting approval higher than 1,200 millimetres?
Director Bryan?
Through Mr Mayor, that restriction of 1,200 for a solid wall, that aligns with the residential planning codes, so that's a common requirement. Obviously, once you go over 1.2 solid, then you've got sightline issues in terms of there's no passive surveillance from the residents. Above 1.2 metres, as long as your fencing material is visually impermeable, so you can see through it, you can go up to 1.8 as standard. It's only the solid part of the wall can't exceed 1.2 metres.
Director Price.
So,
He has a habit of going like this as you tap along. We'll have to cast these hands.
so just following up, there's no strict criteria. You would just assess it on how permeable it is once an application came through to the city if they were to exceed 1.2 metres.
Yeah, that's correct. It basically 1.2 is allowed solid up to that height, and you can go to 1.8 as long as everything above the 1.2 is of a visually impervious material. So, if you see brick fencing with pillars or slats in the middle, which allows that sight lines back and forth between the street and the property line.
And just for clarification, so that's a statewide rule. Obviously, people used to build walls 1.8 metres outside the front of their house. That's just now statewide.
Director Bright?
Yeah, that's statewide. There are circumstances where a high 1.8 metre wall at the front boundary is appropriate, and that may be, for example, at the intersection of a major road. So there are, I guess, examples in the R codes where front fences of above 1.2 solid are acceptable because of the glare from headlights, the traffic noise. So there are certain circumstances where there's some guidance around that.
Thank you. Councillors, we'll move on to CD 026 of 21, and that's the City of Canning Waste Local Law. Any questions on that item? Thank you. We'll move on to CD 027 of 21, Proposed Dog Amendment Local Law of 2021. Any questions on that item? None. Thank you. We'll move to EN 014 of 21, the responsible officer being Mr Ashley McKinnon, the Acting Director of Canning Environment. This item is for a request for a commemorative tree, plaque and plinth, policy CM 188 for a company called Strata Green in Canning Vale. The item is on page 71 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Saberi?
I was wondering if we know what type of tree it's going to be, or is it? I don't know if I missed that in the report.
Is that yet to be determined?
That's correct, Mayor. Councillor Saberi, the tree is yet to be determined, but will be one of the species we would normally put within the park precinct.
Thank you, councillors. We'll move to EN 015 of 20. Sorry? Where? Sorry, Councillor Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, you've got to be quick around here. Just with those trees, is there any, I've had a look at it and I can't see any plan to, is there a plan to how they're going to put the trees? Is it 10 in a circle, 10 in a line on the fence? What's the plan there?
I'm not sure. Have we got that far yet, Acting Director?
No, we haven't. Deputy Mayor Jacobs, the final placement of the tree would be in conjunction, collaboration with the City Greening Department in terms of the appropriate placement of the tree, and that regards other trees in the park, but also sightlines.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Thank you. EN 015, parking control for 3 locations being Rhonda Avenue in Willerton, Tribute Street West in Shelley, Tudor Avenue, South Riverton, a 4th one in Tomlinson Road in Welshpool. The recommendation is on page 77. Are there any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Kunza.
I just wanted to confirm that the city's now trying to not put signs everywhere and are using street sign markings, because I know previously with the ones on Monona Avenue there were people a bit flummoxed at how many signs were put up. I just want to make sure we're now trying to reduce the amount of signage we're doing for these things.
Acting Director, is that the intent?
Councillor Kunza, the amount of signage we install is consistent with safety and the design of the traffic improvements. But in general principle, the city tries to avoid clutter, visual clutter. on traffic signage. But I'll bring forth the Officer Moore to add further detail for you.
Officer Moore, the question, did you hear the question? I'll just get you to introduce yourself and answer Councillor Kunza's query. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, Councillor Kunza, the general principle is to declutter the roadside environment where possible. The purpose of the signage, however, is directly related to the local laws. So where the rangers require signage to be able to infringe and enforce the local laws, the signage is provided. So where existing provisions of the local laws can be utilised and the line marking option exists as a reinforcing mechanism so people understand the intent, we elect to use that. Where there is no provision for that, we are forced to place signage.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kunza. Councillor Barry, you had your hand raised.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Look, I don't have a problem with any of it, sort of to that extent, but just with the Tomlinson Road one, I'm trying to find it again, but I was of the understanding that the criteria was in relation to a warehouse that was a packing house of some description, which must have had a great deal of activity. And the question is that the criteria for this parking prohibition, that factory that now is not and is possibly going to be the same sort of thing? And if it's a different business, will that make any
Acting
difference?
Director McKinnon.
Director McKinnon.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Generally, with these areas, industrial areas, we look at the swept turn or the movement of large semi-trailers into and out of these larger lots in relation to safety and visibility sight lines of the vehicles. And often parking or vehicles that are parked obstruct the clear path of those vehicles into these industrial lots. The change of purpose of the lot itself is not as relevant as the vehicles that go into and out of that particular lot. But if you want further detail, we can provide it as written form. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? We'll move on. Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, just before we go down this an enforcement type strategy, have we, and there's not any information that I can see in the recommendation, but have we gone down the path of education strategy and worked with the school, spoken to the principal, we looked at handing out pamphlets, maybe if our rangers have gone down there, have they handed out any cautions to people, any infringements to people? Do we know those sort of numbers?
I think some of it's a statutory requirement, isn't it, Mr. McKinnon?
That's correct, Mayor. Councillor Sweeney, we do engage in a range of collaborative activities with schools as part of that safety enhancement. And we'd need to provide further detail on notice, but I'll actually ask Officer Moore again to just give you a little bit of detail about the work we do with the schools for your guidance.
Mr. Moore, thank you.
Thank you, and via the Mayor. Councillor Sweeney, the Safe Canning team actually get out to each of our schools on a scheduled basis at the start of each year to, I guess, inform the strategies around parking around these school environments. Ranger Buddy goes out to address the children at the school as well and reinforce some of the other strategies that we've got for walking and cycling safely to school and other initiatives that the city is involved in. The education is the first step. Where that education is not working, we need to make sure that there is an ability to, I guess, enforce people move on. It becomes a significant deterrent, and particularly the signage around that very clearly identifies where there is a requirement for that space to be kept clear of parked vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Just one more.
Councillor Sweeney, yep.
So that's great that we do that. Do we go one step further though and have our rangers or our community safety officers go there on school times during drop-off and pick-ups so that it's a visual deterrent for people coming in and maybe engage with some of those people and talk to them about educating awareness in conjunction with collaborating with the school? Is that what you're talking about as well? Because I know from my experience, you know, it's extremely helpful to parents when that does happen. So I just asked the question because it's not contained in here, and we seem from this going straight to an enforcement instead of getting an understanding of what actually happens, and you've already just explained that. So,
thank you, Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you, and by the Mayor. That is certainly the first step with our Ranger and Community Safety team to actually attend those sites, have a visual presence on the site, reiterate. I guess with a lot of these you'll see there are existing provisions of the road traffic code. You can't park within a certain number of metres of a solid white line, and the very first step is to go and inform those residents or parents of students at these school sites quite often that they shouldn't be parking their vehicle there, endeavour to deter them and reinforce the correct behaviours in the road environment. I believe there are no warnings issued. The systems that we have in place don't do that, so they are very much verbal warnings as opposed to recorded warnings. But yeah, as a first step, education is always the preference, and from there, where the issues remain, we move forward to more significant deterrence.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Moore.
Thank you.
You have another question before we move on, Councillor Holland?
Yeah, I'm just curious at why we're doing Tomlinson Road when the demand is not there anymore and no one really wants it. Why are we doing it? Why are we spending money on something when we don't need to?
Acting Director?
We do respond to a need expressed by the users of those sites, and that's what we've done in this particular case.
But the need of that has expired now since the closing of the warehouse. It's in your own report.
Director?
So the need continues in terms of the actual light, but I'll just call on Officer Moore to elaborate on the reasons why that parking next to that particular lot is deemed to be requiring prohibition.
Mr Moore, the question relates to the Tomlinson Road site.
And by the Mayor, Councillor Holland, whilst that use ceases at the moment on that site, with the use still permitted on the site, it's anticipated that it will immediately pick up again when that site becomes occupied, and the same issues come back. To avoid the delay in being able to deal with it the next time, it is more prudent to actually place those restrictions in now, given the same vehicles will be utilising the site and utilise the remaining road environment for which this same set of recommendations is consistent.
Thank you, Mr Moore.
So we're putting a thing in here for what may or may not happen in the future. And with a warehouse, and the way warehousing is at the moment, especially with like you've got all the other places in Jandakot.
I think if you've got a question,
yeah, I'm saying, that's the question. Are we doing this for something that may or may not happen in the future? And the background is this was because warehousing is in abundance at the moment.
I'd have to just comment, though, that Mr Moore just gave a response to say that even though it may be unoccupied at the moment, the same circumstance will apply again as soon as it's re-let. So deal with it now. So the same purpose for the block still exists. I know what you're saying. You're saying right now it may be empty and there might not be a problem right now, but in a few weeks' time it could be re-let and we'd be right here in the same issue.
Or a few years' time, if that's what I was giving the background on the way warehouses are staying unoccupied for so long now. This could be used down the track.
Okay. Any other questions on those items, councillors, before we move on? Thank you. We'll move on to EN 016 of 21, Sustainability and Environment Advisory Group Meeting, the unconfirmed minutes from June. Any questions on those? Councillor Barry?
Yeah, just to, in the minutes, agenda items, it says there's a question asked in relation to the urban forest strategy. It was largely unfunded. I believe that's not the case anymore. So what date was this held? 24th of June. So I would have thought that was no longer the case. Is that correct?
Acting Director? Do you want to take that question on notice, or you?
I will take that question on notice, Councillor.
And one other one in the sustainability report, the group is starting to, or going to be using the committee room because the technology needs work at Creek. Do we have any idea what's going on there? How much it'll cost to get that fixed or anything?
Acting Director.
Certainly, Councillor Barry, I'll call on Program Manager Dion Johnson for Parks City Greening to respond to you.
Thank you. Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, we're working with our ICT team to understand what sort of costs they would be. It's very difficult to hold a virtual meeting there. The sound quality isn't great, nor is the video. So we're just working with the team to develop up those costs and see if we can implement that so we can resume the meetings down at Creek.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CO004 of 21, the responsible officer being Dr Sarah McQuaid, the Director of Canning Community, the title of the report being DLGSC Club Night Lights Grant Applications. The recommendation is on page 98 of the agenda and is on screen. Any questions on that item? Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Centenary Park South, will the 250 lux lights be sufficient for night play, match play that is? Thank you.
Is the 250 lux sufficient, Dr McQuaid?
Yes, it will be.
Yes. Thank you, councillors. If there's no more questions, we'll move on. Thank you to CO005 of 21, the title of that report being CRFFF Annual Forward Planning Funding Round of 2022 and 2023. The report, the recommendation is on page 106 of tonight's agenda and is on the screen. Any questions on that item? None, thank you. We will move on. Councillors, at item 8, notices of motion for consideration at the next ordinary council meeting. There are none to be considered tonight. Urgent business, there are none. Confidential matters, we do have a confidential matter this evening, so I'll just ask those, thank you, Sean. I'll just ask those in the public gallery that are here tonight to please exit the public gallery, and I'll just ask governance to make sure that the gallery is clear, the speakers are off in the there being no further business, I declare the meeting now closed at some 8:45, is that right? No, it's not, 7:45, good Lord. 7:45 p.m.